You probably think you are the one watching your cat. You notice where it sleeps, what it eats, where it hides, and all the strange little things it does throughout the day. But there is another side to this relationship that is much easier to miss. While you have been watching your cat has been watching you too. And it may have been learning far more about you than you ever realized. Cats spend an enormous amount of time simply observing what happens around them. They notice movement, sounds, routines, and changes in the people they live with. Your cat may not understand your conversations the way another person would, but it can learn that certain sounds, movements, and situations usually lead to something important. Over time, your everyday life becomes a collection of familiar patterns that your cat learns to recognize. Think about the sound of your footsteps coming down the hallway. Your cat may hear those footsteps before you even enter the room. The sound of a key turning in the door can mean something different from the sound of a stranger arriving. Even the way you open a cabinet or move around the kitchen can become familiar. To you, these are ordinary sounds. To your cat, they can be clues about what is about to happen next. Some cats seem to know when their person is about to come home. They may wait near the door, look toward the hallway, or suddenly become more alert when they hear familiar sounds. It can feel almost mysterious when a cat seems to know you are coming before you appear. But mystery is not always necessary. Sometimes an animal simply becomes extremely familiar with the patterns that happen around the person it knows best. Your cat may also notice changes in you that you barely notice yourself. Maybe you move differently when you are tired. Maybe your voice becomes quieter when something is bothering you. Maybe you spend more time sitting in one place when you are having a difficult day. Your cat does not need to understand the reason behind these changes to notice that something is different. It is paying attention to the pattern. And this is where the relationship becomes interesting. Your cat does not have to understand every word you say to learn something about you. It can learn your routines, your reactions, your habits, and the things that usually get your attention. In a way, you become part of the environment your cat has learned to understand. But the more interesting question is what your cat does with everything it has learned. Because observation is only the beginning. Eventually, your cat has to decide where it feels comfortable, who it wants to approach, when it wants attention, and when it wants to be left alone. And some of the clearest clues may appear during the moments when your cat is doing absolutely nothing, especially when it chooses to sleep beside you. Sleep is one of the most vulnerable moments for any animal. When your cat curls up beside you and falls asleep, it is choosing to become less alert while you are nearby. That does not automatically mean your cat thinks of you as its parent, but it can tell you something important about how comfortable it feels in your presence. A cat that feels unsafe usually has good reasons to remain alert. Sometimes the position your cat chooses is even more interesting. It may sleep with its back toward you, stretch out beside you, or expose parts of its body that would normally need protection. It may look completely casual to you, but that relaxed posture can be a sign that your presence has become familiar enough for your cat to lower its guard. It does not need to keep watching you every second. You may notice something similar when your cat becomes nervous. A strange sound, an unfamiliar visitor, or a sudden change in the environment can make a cat disappear. But sometimes, the place it chooses to move toward is you. It may hide nearby, sit close to you, or simply remain in the same room. That does not mean you magically removed its fear. It may mean that your presence has become part of what feels familiar. Then there are the cats that seem to follow their owners everywhere. You walk into the kitchen, and there it is. You move into another room, and somehow it appears again. You go to sit down, and suddenly your cat is already nearby. Sometimes the reason is simple curiosity. Sometimes it wants food or attention. But sometimes it may simply prefer to keep a familiar person within sight. And being close does not always mean your cat wants to be touched. This is something humans often misunderstand. A cat may choose to sit beside you without wanting your hand on its head. It may enjoy your company while still wanting control over the interaction. That is not rejection. In the cat's world, being near someone and physically interacting with them are two different things. Have you ever found your cat sleeping on your clothes? Maybe it chooses the shirt you just took off, the blanket you use every night, or the place where you usually sit. Your scent is familiar, and familiar things can be comforting. To your cat, that piece of clothing may simply be another object that carries a very recognizable part of the environment it knows. Some cats even seem to develop little rituals around their owners coming home. They may wait near the door, appear from another room, or walk toward you as soon as you enter. Again, there can be many reasons for this behavior. Maybe dinner is coming, maybe attention is coming, or maybe your return simply means that the familiar person has finally come back into the environment. You can sometimes see comfort in the most ordinary moments too. A cat that calmly eats, grooms itself, or stretches out while you are nearby may simply feel relaxed enough to continue its normal behavior. It does not need to constantly monitor you. And that quiet lack of concern can tell you something about how predictable your presence has become. Over time, trust is rarely built through one dramatic moment. It is usually built through hundreds of small experiences that happen again and again. You feed your cat. You open the door. You sit in the same chair. You respond to its sounds. You respect its space. The repetition matters. A relationship can become familiar precisely because nothing terrible happens when you are around. And once a cat becomes comfortable with you, something else begins to happen. It starts learning how to communicate with you. Not necessarily with words, of course. Instead, it uses sounds, movements, posture, eyes, ears, and timing. And over time, you may start recognizing a few of those signals without even realizing that you have learned them. A cat's meow is not simply one universal message. The sound can change depending on the situation and the individual cat. Some cats are naturally more vocal than others. Some make short sounds when they want attention, while others become much more persistent when they want food. What matters is not just the sound itself, but the situation in which your cat uses it. This is one reason living with the same cat for years can feel like learning a private language. You begin to notice small differences. One sound might appear around mealtime. Another might happen when your cat wants a door opened. Another might happen when your cat wants a door opened. You may not be able to translate every sound perfectly, but you can learn the patterns. Sometimes your cat may simply be calling for you. You are in another room, and suddenly you hear a familiar meow. You answer, and your cat appears. It can almost feel like a conversation, and in a practical sense, that is exactly what you are participating in. Your cat makes a sound, you respond, and over time, both of you learn what usually happens next. Then there are the strange little sounds that are not quite a normal meow. Some cats chirp, trill, or make soft noises when they see something interesting or approach a person. These sounds can be surprisingly expressive, but again, there is no single translation that works for every cat. Context matters. The same sound can mean something different depending on what the cat is doing at the time. And then there is the famous purr. Most people hear a purring cat and immediately think, happiness. Often that may be part of the story. But purring is not always a simple emotional label. Cats can also purr in situations involving stress, discomfort, or uncertainty. So instead of asking, "Is my cat purring, yes or no?" it is better to ask what else is happening around the purr. One of the gentlest signals a cat can give is the slow blink. Your cat looks at you, its eyes soften, and then it slowly closes them before opening them again. People often describe this as a kind of cat kiss. That is a charming way to think about it, but the deeper point is that relaxed eye behavior can occur during calm social interactions. Try watching your cat the next time it is completely relaxed. You may notice that its eyes move differently when it is comfortable compared with when it is alert or suspicious. A slow blink is not a magic sentence that always translates into "I love you." It is better understood as one small part of a larger picture of relaxed communication. And the eyes are only one part of that picture. Your cat's ears can change position. Its tail can move differently. Its body can become loose, tense, low, or suddenly still. These signals happen quickly, and humans often notice them only after something has already happened. But once you begin paying attention, you start seeing how much information a cat communicates without making a sound. A cat can change its entire posture in just a few seconds. The ears shift, the tail changes position, the body turns towards something, the eyes become wider. None of these signals should be read completely on their own, but together they create a much clearer picture. The real skill is not memorizing one translation for one behavior, it is learning to notice the whole situation. And that brings us to one of the biggest mistakes humans make with cats. We see one behavior and immediately give it one meaning. The cat purrs, so it must be happy. The cat bites, so it must be playful. The cat walks away, so it must be angry. But cats are not that simple. Sometimes the behavior we think we understand is telling us something completely different. Take purring, for example. A relaxed cat lying comfortably beside you may purr because it feels good and safe. But purring can also appear in situations where a cat is stressed or uncomfortable. That does not mean every purr is a warning sign. It simply means that the sound alone cannot tell the entire story. You have to look at the body, the surroundings, and what happened before it. A gentle bite can be just as confusing. Sometimes cats use their mouths during play or social interaction. Sometimes a bite happens because a cat has had enough touching. Sometimes it is simply overstimulated. Calling every little bite a love bite may sound cute, but it can cause you to miss what your cat is actually trying to communicate. Then there is the tail. Humans often instinctively compare a cat's tail to a dog's tail, but cats can use their tails in very different ways. A moving tail does not automatically mean happiness. The speed, position, and situation all matter. If you learn to watch the entire cat instead of focusing only on the tail, the message becomes much easier to understand. Sometimes your cat may walk away while you are petting it. It can feel personal. You are giving affection and suddenly the cat simply leaves. But walking away does not necessarily mean, "I don't like you." It may simply mean, "That is enough for now." Cats often communicate boundaries through small changes before they become obvious. Even turning its back on you can be misunderstood. To a human, turning away can look like ignoring someone. But for a cat, calmly sitting with its back toward you can happen in a relaxed social situation. A cat does not always need to face you to acknowledge you. Sometimes it is simply comfortable enough not to keep watching you. And what about staring? A cat staring at you can mean many things depending on the context. Maybe it wants food. Maybe it is curious. Maybe it is watching what you are doing. Maybe it has noticed something you have not. The important thing is not to turn one stare into a dramatic emotional message without looking at everything else happening around it. Then there are the cats that hide. A cat disappearing under a bed can make an owner wonder if something is wrong with their relationship. But hiding can simply be a response to noise, unfamiliar people, stress, or a change in the environment. A cat can be deeply attached to you and still need a private place where it feels completely secure. This is why cat behavior is so interesting. The same outward action can have different meanings in different situations. A cat lying down can be relaxed, tired, frightened, or simply waiting. A cat walking toward you can want affection, food, or nothing more than to pass by. Context turns behavior into communication. Once you understand that, you stop trying to translate your cat like a simple dictionary. You begin watching patterns instead. What happened before the behavior? What is the cat's body doing? What happens afterward? And most importantly, what does this particular cat usually do in this particular situation? That is when you start seeing the individual personality behind the behavior. And there is another side to all of this that is almost amusing. Your cat is not only learning how you respond to it, it is also learning your daily routine. The strange part is that you may not realize how much of your schedule has become predictable to an animal that spends most of its life watching you. Think about your alarm clock. You may wake up to the same sound every morning. Your cat may learn that sound too. It may know that after the alarm comes movement, then breakfast, then doors opening and closing, and eventually you leaving the house. The cat does not need to understand what an alarm clock is. It only needs to recognize what usually happens after the sound. The same thing can happen with your front door. Your cat may hear the key, the lock, the handle, and the door before you even step inside. Over time, those sounds become a familiar sequence. You may think you are simply coming home. Your cat may already know that the sequence has started several seconds earlier. Mealtime is another obvious example. Many cats seem to have an internal clock when food is involved. They may appear in the kitchen before you even reach the bowl. They may stare at you, walk around your legs, or make a sound that suddenly becomes very difficult to ignore. You may think your cat has incredible timing. More likely, it has simply learned your routine extremely well. Cats can also learn the places you use most: your favorite chair, your side of the sofa, the spot where you sit with your laptop, the place where you usually relax at night. Sometimes your cat will occupy those spaces before you do. It may look like your cat is stealing your seat, but it may simply have learned that this location is important because you spend so much time there. Even your footsteps can become familiar. Humans tend to think of footsteps as generic sounds, but animals that live closely with us can become very familiar with individual patterns. The rhythm, speed, and direction may tell your cat that you are approaching before it sees you. Suddenly, the animal that seems to be ignoring you lifts its head and looks directly toward the hallway. Your cat may even recognize the little sequence of actions that happens before you leave. You pick up your keys, you put on your shoes, you grab your bag, you walk toward the door. Maybe your cat watches from the sofa. Maybe it follows you. Maybe it simply disappears. But after enough repetitions, those actions become meaningful because they predict what happens next. And here is where things become especially interesting. Your cat may learn not only what you do, but how you react to what it does. If a certain sound makes you look up, the cat may use that sound again. If sitting beside you gets attention, it may repeat the behavior. If walking toward the kitchen usually leads to food, that path becomes worth remembering. Maybe your cat has discovered the exact behavior that makes you get out of bed. Maybe it taps the door. Maybe it meows. Maybe it sits directly on your chest and looks at you until you surrender. From your perspective, your cat is being demanding. From the cat's perspective, it has simply discovered a behavior that reliably produces a result. Food is an especially powerful example. A cat may learn which sounds, locations, or behaviors usually get a reaction from you. If one particular meow is followed by food often enough, that meow becomes useful. If rubbing against your legs gets your attention, your cat may remember that too. This is not necessarily manipulation in the human sense. It is learning through repetition. So sometimes you may think you are training your cat, while your cat is quietly training you at the same time. You teach it where the food is. It teaches you what sound means, I want food. You teach it when the door opens. It teaches you exactly how long it is willing to wait. And somewhere along the way, both of you become very good at predicting each other. But this relationship does not work in only one direction. You are learning too. You begin recognizing the difference between a hungry meow and an attention-seeking meow. You learn when your cat wants to be touched and when it wants space. You notice the little warning signs that tell you when your cat has had enough. Without realizing it, you are building your own vocabulary. Eventually, you may become surprisingly good at knowing when your cat wants to be alone. Maybe it moves to a quiet corner. Maybe its body becomes tense when you approach. Maybe it simply gives you a look that you have learned to recognize. Instead of forcing interaction, you step back. That small decision can become part of the trust between you. You also learn when your cat actually wants affection. Maybe it approaches you and presses its head against your hand. Maybe it settles beside you. Maybe it gives you that slow blink and waits. The important part is that you begin responding to what the cat is showing you, rather than deciding what you want the interaction to be. Over time, the two of you can develop a kind of private communication. It may not look impressive to anyone else. A certain look, a particular sound, a movement toward the kitchen, a pause beside the door. But because you have experienced these things hundreds of times, they start to mean something specific to you and your cat. Even small routines can become part of that relationship. Maybe your cat waits beside you while you drink coffee. Maybe it sits nearby when you work. Maybe it follows you at night before settling into its favorite place. None of these moments are dramatic, but relationships are rarely built from dramatic moments. They are built from repetition. Your cat may also remember the experiences that happen again and again around you. The sound of your voice, the way you handle it, the places where you feed it, the times when you play, the moments when you give it space. Over time, those experiences help create expectations. Your cat learns what usually happens when you are around. Of course, caring for a cat is not only about affection. You provide food, safety, shelter, and medical care when needed. You clean the litter box, you open doors, you protect the environment around it. These practical things may not feel emotional to you, but to an animal, predictable care can become an important part of what makes life feel secure. And your cat can affect you in return. You may become more patient because you have learned to wait for its signals. You may notice small changes in behavior that you once would have ignored. You may even find yourself changing your daily routine around another living creature. The relationship changes both sides, even if neither side ever consciously planned it. So, after years of living together, the relationship can become much more complicated than simply owner and pet. You have learned parts of its language, and it has learned parts of yours. You recognize its routines, and it recognizes yours. You know when to approach, when to wait, and when a simple glance is enough. Which raises one final question. Who are you in your cat's world? Maybe the answer is not as simple as calling yourself its owner, and we should be careful about assuming that every cat sees its human as a parent. Your relationship is shaped by experience, familiarity, safety, care, and countless repeated interactions. You may simply be one of the most familiar and predictable beings in its environment, but sometimes that role can become remarkably important. Your cat does not need to understand the word love for your relationship to matter. It does not need to think in human categories. It only needs to experience the same small things again and again. Your voice, your presence, your routines, your care, and the feeling that this place is familiar. That familiarity can become something powerful without ever needing a human label. And maybe that is what makes living with a cat so fascinating. We spend years thinking we are the ones taking care of them, feeding them, studying them, and trying to understand their strange little behaviors. But at the same time, they are learning us. They learn our footsteps, our schedules, our voices, our reactions, and the tiny habits we never realized anyone noticed. So the next time your cat watches you from across the room, do not assume it is simply staring. Maybe it is waiting, wondering, remembering, or simply recognizing another familiar moment in a life you share together. You came into its world thinking you would spend years learning about your cat, but perhaps, quietly and without you noticing, your cat has been learning about you too. And maybe that is one of the most beautiful things about living with another animal.